Enterprise Influencers, Perspectives from Technology Leaders.
Welcome to the Enterprise Influencers podcast, where we explore the inner workings of large organizations and the people and technologies that help them get things done. Hi, Patrick. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Giles.
What are we doing today? Who do we have? We got a guest for once.
We do have a guest, Giles. I want to welcome to the podcast Doug Ware, who's probably one of the smartest human beings I know personally.
Oh no, I would agree with that.
So I've known Doug for many years. We won't say how many, but many years. And he's always been someone that I've personally always respected and had a high opinion of, like his technical prowess and abilities, and also his perspectives on where technology is going. Doug is joining us, a newly minted MVP. Correct. Congratulations. Or
Congratulations,
I should say reminted, right? This is like the reissue, like when you reissue the vinyl from the back in the day.
It's my third time.
Yes,
in the 90s, I've been an MVP at least some of each of the last 4 decades for a little while.
Impressive record.
Before we were working together and stuff like that, and I haven't said that. I may have said this to you in the past when we were working together, but I used to follow your blog and all that kind of stuff, and it was definitely inspiration for when I did my own blogging as well. So there you go. There's a nice and embarrassing thing to say. But
maybe you can get his autograph later, Giles.
And a t-shirt.
That just anytime somebody told me that they read something I wrote, it puts me over the moon. I quit. I still blog, not as much as I used to, but I don't have analytics on my blog anymore, because it used to be that I would write a post and then I would just watch the Google Analytics map for where people from the world were reading the article.
I used to do that.
Well, that's what we do with our podcast, and it's really sad.
And we know where every 20 people who listen to our podcast, we know exactly in the world where you are.
Like, we call them personally to thank them for listening.
That's right. It doesn't take long. My mom told me to write thank you notes, and that's what I do.
But see, I quit doing it because it made me start trying to write things that I knew people wanted to read about, which isn't why I blog. I really blog to report on what I'm learning, because it's scary, right? You put it on record, what's your opinion or what you thought about something, and it's just out there in the world for your wrongness. You're like, behold my shame for all time.
I screwed up and I got out of it like this.
But it took away the joy of the journaling aspect of it when I got obsessed with the stats. And so I just don't look at it anymore. But so now I just don't know. And so anytime somebody says I read or they bring it up or whatever, it really does make my day and keep me going, because otherwise it's just
allow me one more moment then to add to that ego then, because when I knew I was going to move to the US about 5 years before that, I thought, how am I going to differentiate myself? And this was around 2007, 2008. And I think you had your Illumination blog going at the time, and I was reading it. And that's what you were doing. You were journaling what you were doing in your consulting gigs and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, I could do that. And then I could do a body of work so that people would know who I was. So I did. And I ran that blog about Project Server and SharePoint, because I was doing all these kind of unique things. And then that got me to being, I think I got nominated for an MVP once, and I never went that far, but
I feel
I almost became a SharePoint master, going on to that SharePoint master program when that was around, and all this kind of stuff. And
we were talking about experts that are now experts and things. So the person who said all the AI experts are now quantum computing experts was Spence Harper on Facebook. Spence is he doesn't hold back on what he thinks about stuff. I'm like, okay.
Yes, heavy inspiration for where I am today, for sure.
Thank you. Whatever the latest thing is. Doug, tell us a little bit about what you're doing these days, because Giles mentioned Illumination. Like, I know we've got this thing called the Ant Army. There's a lot of cool things that you're working on these days. Just take a minute and just give us an update on what you're doing right now.
Yeah, I'm not going to go too far back in time, but I'm going to go back a little ways. So I'm known for SharePoint, probably most recently. And I ran the .NET user group here in town. I'm just a community person. I like to get out there. And so SharePoint was a real blessing for me, but it's a little bit of a curse too, because
I feel that
I specialized in it, right? And so the reason that you can't read those old SharePoint articles was because I just didn't want people to offer me SharePoint opportunities anymore because they were too easy to take. And I felt like I just had to make a change. And so I closed my consulting business and I went to work at EY with you guys. And that was awesome because I could work in a huge environment and build what I told people it was like building an airport or something like that, like massive. We'd have meetings about which countries we were lighting up and talk about do we have 1 billion documents yet? That sort of thing. So like crazy sorts of things. And that was a lot of fun, but I was looking for what's going to be the next thing. And I bought a drone and I was into computer vision. And I got my drone license and I was learning about NERFs which is neural radiance fields. And I bought this computer and ordered an NVIDIA 4090 when they came out, and I had to wait months for it to show up. And while I was waiting for it, OpenAI released ChatGPT 3.5 or GPT 3.5, and ChatGPT lit up. And that was it. I haven't done any computer vision stuff really since. I've done a lot of audio and I've done OCR and played around with multimodal stuff, but my exploration of the PyTorch libraries and all that stuff, it just stopped. It became about AI, and I was still at EY, and I was spending all my time studying it, and I realized that as the rate of change was that I really needed to get out there and just build lots of stuff. And so I started my consulting business back up, and I've spent the last couple of years building POCs and coming up with theories and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And I'm not a data scientist. We were talking about this. I don't train models or that sort of stuff. I'm an application. I'm a systems builder. I build platforms. I'm all about big system architectures and integrating things together to build software that does stuff. I have to explain to a customer why the thing that we were 6 months into building now was outmoded because the OpenAI just did Developer Week. And it's all different now, and that's what happened. That's what has happened for the last couple of years. But things have stabilized enough now that we'll talk about Ant Army and that other stuff. But now I'm starting to build real stuff that does real work for real applications, and I have actual theories about how to do that are grounded in hands-on experience, not hype from the internet. And it was the not knowing which hype to believe and which hype to not believe that really kept me up at night.
Yeah. And I think you're not the only person experiencing that, right? It's in our organizations, it's in Microsoft building up the hype. And I know you're a Microsoft MVP, so we won't talk too badly about it.
It's okay.
They need to justify their spend.
I think the fact that I'm honest is why I'm an MVP, honestly.
I was going to say, I know even from following you back in the past, like you've never been one to shy away from calling Microsoft out when they are maybe going down the wrong path. We won't say right or wrong. I think there's a value.
I'm more likely to do it as an MVP because I'm taking benefits from them to give them feedback.
Yeah, absolutely.
Honestly, those years were in between when I was like semi-retired from the community. You didn't see me complaining about Microsoft. There was feedback I had, but I didn't owe it to them because I didn't agree socially and through this other thing to try stuff and tell you what I think. And it's exhausting being honest. It's exhausting being honest. And I think actually as I get older, maybe I get a little less honest just because now I have more friends and I might know somebody whose name is associated with something, but still
more
even then, if it's
in your feedback.
I never make it personal. I don't never.
Yeah. I think that's important. I think one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is really because exactly what you said. Like you're one of the few people like I've seen that's actually taking all these things that we're seeing in theory and we're seeing in all these announcements and the hype cycle around all the technology releases and things. And I've used some of these technologies in a hands-on way. I know, Giles, you have as well, but I haven't really sat down and built anything with AI. I'm not building solutions using the models and the different tools that are out there. And so I really wanted to dig into that first person experience that you bring to the table. And one of the things we've been talking a lot on the show about where the industry is going and what it means for jobs and all these sorts of things. And we talked in our last episode about where like the direction, the future of jobs, like where is it going with AI? And one of the things that we learned was that the predictions really are that we're not going to need less software developers. We're not going to need less software architects. We'll actually need more. And but the skills required and the things that we're doing may change. And I'm curious to hear like some of your kind of lessons learned about how solutions are being built or maybe will be built in the future. And if you could share some of the insights that you've gained in your explorations, we should say, into all this.
Sure. So that's a great place to start. I'll just talk for the next hour.
I'll just kick back now. I'm going to go get a beer and we'll.
Where's my beer? Let's talk about my own experience, right? When I first started using the language models to do stuff, I did a few sessions, and this was like way, way back in time in 2023. And I thought I was going to get to the bottom of it just by engaging with it and trying to use it as a tool and suspending disbelief. So I did some sessions where I was like OpenAI take the wheel, so to speak, and I just told it what I wanted it to do, and I role played in it, and I engaged with it and using it in a few different things. And I was frankly terrified. I tell this story, it's like I said, I'm honest. Think of me what you will. But I was sitting here at my computer one day, and I asked it to create a PowerShell commandlet to generate a PowerPoint presentation for me from a JSON file, which I know to be a hard thing because OpenXML, OpenOffice XML, and it's hard. And I was using .NET and PowerShell, right? And so it printed out this beautiful PowerShell commandlet. And when I looked at it and it read, it was commented, like it was perfect. And I chuckled. And then I chuckled again, and then I all of a sudden I realized I was sobbing, like literally crying, and and had this moment of disassociation where the part of me that was on the exploratory journey was like, wow, this is fascinating response that you're having right now, but in that moment I was like, it's just over for you, like your whole life is just nobody needs what you can do now. And that whole script was a hallucination. It was based on a library that didn't exist. Long story short, it didn't work. But I went through the next 30 minutes. I went through this dialogue trying to make the thing work. And that was one of the lessons that I learned from it very early on, which was that I can only safely use it to do things that I understand. I can use it to do research, but when it comes time to actually use the output of it or do something, I better understand what I'm doing, because the words are pretty. It's always going to be well formatted. And if it's code, it might compile. And now in the case of PowerShell, it doesn't compile, and that code did not in fact run. But so to engage with it safely, you need to understand it. Another lesson I learned that day is it's not nearly as smart as it appears to be. This would have been like within the first month or two of having access to it. So Christmas holidays that year in 2023. And so as time has gone by, I've just been adding on to those simple axioms and ways to think about the language models, and I'll give you a couple of them right now. One of them is the way the AI systems work that we have now is by giving it the answer to the question and letting it repeat the answer to you. That's how they work. And they're really good at that as long as the text is contextual and it makes sense logically in terms of language. But if I build Well, say you're using Army, which is my chat platform, which is an multi-agent system that you can use. And so it's got an agent that understands how to use email, and one that understands how to work with a calendar, and one that can take notes, and one that searches the web. And you use them together in a threaded conversation, right? When I ask the Outlook assistant what my recent emails are, what the assistant knows how to do is how to use the Outlook API. When it answers the question, it answers it by telling me what the tool call came back with, which were the contents of the email. The model doesn't know what that is, and you can extend that to anything. So anytime you hear, well, there's an AI that can do a thing, the first question is it plausible that has enough information to be able to do it in the first place?
Yeah, because we all know the developers that I mean, I think I've worked with those developers that produce that beautiful like PowerShell script, and then like you actually try to use it, right, and the thing just doesn't work, right? So basically we're replacing Bob that was like had a great resume and somehow fooled somebody into getting a job with now the AI. But I guess the point in the story being like the human, somebody still has to run it. Like the thing has to work and has to do the thing that you want it to do. And if ultimately you get this great thing, but it doesn't work, it's useless.
Yeah, and you have to be able to think critically. So it's, on any given topic, it's like asking a guy on the street or, the chick at McDonald's what the answer to the question is.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're going to know and they're going to give you a good answer. Other times they're not going to know, but they're super engaging and polite and convincing, right?
I think that's honestly been a bit of my personal struggle with how to get value out of using the AI is that I oftentimes feel like it's going to take me longer to explain to the AI what I want and what to give me than it would be for just me to do it myself. And so I'm, just being honest here, right? I've struggled with adopting AI for that reason in certain circumstances, at least. Now, if it's, hey, take this 100-page document and summarize it into some pertinent points, I think it's a really good way to do that. But if it's like, I'm trying to visualize something in a PowerPoint or like something I'm writing or something like that, I almost feel like it's more of a distraction than it is a help.
I think it depends on what you're doing, right? Would you rely on the language model to summarize today's news for you? Probably. If it tells you the weather is wrong, whatever. You're gonna let it summarize the bomb disarmament manual, right?
Yes.
Which wire do I cut?
But it depends on the model, right? Because you said it starts with people feeding it the answers. That in itself is feeding something that is subjective.
So that's the other problem with it is when I'm building a business solution or something that I need to have narrow domain knowledge, it's not a big win for me that the model knows more stuff. In fact, don't want to have to argue with it about facts that it was taught in my domain. Like the less it knows, and the more reliant it is on responding to my data from my API calls or whatever and respecting that stuff. But going back to the how do I use it, Patrick, what you're talking about, I think the fact of the matter is everything you know about software development, everything we know about working is wrong given this new tool that we have. But we haven't figured out yet what right looks like, which makes it very exciting to work with. But it's also why you need to have some real grounding and understand what the reality of how it actually works is, because I encounter it with customers all the time where they'll have 5 ideas that they got together and they discussed about how they might go about it. They're new to them and they're spitballing POCs. And maybe 2 of them are impossible. And one of them is very feasible. But they can't, as a group, they don't have any grounding to be able to pick out those 2 impossible ones because they don't have enough of a conceptual understanding about how it actually works to discern what happened in between when they asked the question and when the answer came out the other side. All the stuff that it needed to do. But it goes back to what I said before, the answer, the systems that use the natural language processing or the audio processing or whatever to turn it from one thing into another. The way they work when they generate the output is by you giving it enough input to give you the output that you're looking for in the first place. And the way they're useful is they can take a bunch of stuff maybe that you're not interested in and help you zero in on the things that you are interested in, or take one set of facts and recast them into a different modality. And in the example of that email assistant that I was talking about in the Army, one of the demos I do for that is find the emails that I got from Dave last April. And the assistant can go, okay, what's today? Oh, last April was this date range. I'm going to build an API call. I'm going to fetch the results. Then I'm going to display the outputs of the user. That replaced me going into Outlook, filtering by the month, scrolling, looking around like an idiot, trying to distinguish the day from church with the day from the one I was really looking for. And that natural language processing, that user experience that I can get by using words or pictures or whatever to express my intent to the computer and to receive the output, is what's new about the generative AI that we didn't have before. Practically couldn't do that before. So all of our user experiences, all of our form factors, how we use them, what a computer is, and we get to be there for the beginning of the new generation.
Yeah, it is. I think that the thing about it, for me at least, is I don't gravitate towards talking to a computer or typing to a computer and saying,
right,
asking it to give me stuff and tell me stuff and treating it like it's a human, right? Because it's a device, right? It's a facilitator, right? But it's not got a personality. It's not someone I want to interact with. And so I find some of those things to be a little forced and like just unnatural. Like it maybe is the best way that I could describe it, at least for myself.
Oh, I buy that. Yeah, because I mean, you don't have the user experiences around them yet. If you could talk to it, if you had the muscle memory to verbally communicate with it instead of through the keyboard, would you feel better about it?
I actually tried to train myself to do that, and I just couldn't like keep it up enough to actually build the muscle memory to do that. And I think it's just partly because it's not, I think the actual physical interfaces to facilitate that naturally aren't there yet.
Exactly. So my point about the user experience.
Yeah. And I actually think I said this to Giles one time. I think like the chatbot, like AI experience, like I don't think we have found the final format for the user experience for AI. I think we're throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall right now, but I don't think we've landed on what it's going to be just yet.
Yeah, and that's why if you're like worried that AI is going to leave you in the dust in the technology space, if you're not engaging with it at all or playing, then that's not a great career strategy.
But that's true of any technology, right? Like any new thing that's starting to gain steam, if you don't keep on top of things.
But you could ignore the internet for a good 10 years after AOL started becoming popular, maybe even longer, right?
Yeah, but then you have to build it into Windows to catch up.
The same is true of this stuff, right? We have these new, there's different kinds of language models that people use. Everybody's familiar with chat models. You go ask a question, you get an answer that starts coming back out immediately. But if you use a reasoning model, it may spend a couple minutes thinking about it, or there may be an agent swarm or that sort of thing going. And there's a lot of advancements that are going on with that. And how cool is that? But take something like Teams and business and M365 chat. They made that to be a chatbot. And when they built the early versions of that, they were like, what's a reasonable timeout for this? Real basic stuff, right? If it can't respond in a minute, just display an error message. It's not going to respond, right? Somebody goes, ta-da, look at the great thing this AI can do. It takes 3 minutes to operate. Fundamentally, at the user experience level, at the very bottom level of the applications, we can't incorporate it into the form factor that we got. And that there's hundreds, thousands, millions of examples of that.
Yeah. Because it could be very reasonable for me to say, hey, go do these really complex things and come back to me with the answer when you have it, right? Like that,
Right.
That's an okay thing. That's a very natural thing for me if I'm interacting with a teammate, right? Hey, I need you to do these tasks and come report your status back to me when you're done, right? And I want to be able to do that with an AI as well, right? And I think that's part of the forced nature of the chat experience where we're having a conversation. Like not everything's a conversation.
Oh yeah, one thing that OpenAI has that we're about to release in the Army platform and other places are jobs schedules. Hey, every day at 8 o'clock, look for emails from Patrick, and then or every 15 minutes do this thing. And
Yeah,
it's an Aegis
send
form or whatever.
me a summary of my day and tell me what I need to do to prepare for these meetings or something. I don't know, like something like that.
Buy me some concert tickets. Get me the RTX 5090 from a merchant directly instead of from a scalper. Those sorts of things, and those things working together. So where we are right now today is the natural language processing phase and people understanding how to build agents that actually work and how to test them. And for me, that's been a big part of my journey this last couple of years. What does that architecture look like? How do we actually do it? And I think that it is very safe for me to say that the technology that we have right now today, if it doesn't advance at all, will change the world over the next decade. We've barely begun to use it, and we've barely begun to figure out how to apply it. And it is not God. It's not the technology that we have now. It's not God level. It's not even general intelligence. It still needs lots and lots of human labor into it. So what we have now is all the technology platforms that we had before, plus this new natural language and computer vision and audio processing that are going to change the form factors of all the user interfaces. And you need to understand that too. And oh, by the way, you're used to working with computer systems that are reliable because you're not old like people like me that are used to like people used to accept their computer blue screening and having to reboot, but maybe check disk would run and they'd be like, hey man, I can't, it's going to be like 30 minutes before I can do whatever because my computer's doing something. I'd be like, yeah, those computers, man,
totally get it.
Yeah, it's fine, whatever. And now we're like, I asked ChatGPT how many letters there were in the word strawberry, and it got it wrong. It's useless. That's a pretty big switch.
I will say that the first code that I really ever worked on, like I used, I think it was what was it was C++, and it was a Borland C++ compiler that ran on DOS, and if you had a like a unhandled error, like it crashed the entire computer. So okay, literally reboot your computer because like you suck.
Yeah.
So
what happened to my work?
I'm older than you think.
No, but the public are our users, the people that are the reason why we get paid to build technology. Their expectations are very different than they were 35 years ago as far as the reliability. And people that are new to the business, with say within the last 10 years, are used to working with reliable technology. They're used to the network being there and actually functioning and the computer. Like today, if I was like, man, my computer crashed and I lost my work, people would be like, what? That's crazy. How's that happen? You
have autosave turned on?
What's wrong with you?
Just go check your OneDrive, man. It's just there.
Seriously.
There's 500 versions.
Isn't that a very domain specific challenge? You have more margin for error in certain domains, right? If you're, like you said, if you're summarizing the bomb dismantling manual, you have very little margin for error. But if you're something, and I can't come up with a good example right now, but something else may not be as, if I'm coming up for a summary or an outline for this podcast, right? Like we've got tons of margin for error. But in accounting, for example, like if I'm talking about this quarter's financial reports, like I want that down to like I want that exact. versus other things may have more margin for error. And I went earlier to like, I'm a system integrator, I'm a builder, I'm not a data scientist, but like all these models are built on data science, right? They're all probability.
But so we also talked about, for a big chunk of time there, I worked with SharePoint and Office products, right? So I know all about integrating with an unreliable system that I don't control. And that's not a slam of M365. But I mean, you don't control it. It could go wrong at any point in time. And, you know, when working someplace where we're in triple digit countries and with 6 figures of users that are all over the globe, something is always going wrong. The accounting scenario that you just gave is a perfect example, because we have been doing the books for a long time as people, and we can do them perfectly. We don't need a computer to do it. Computers revolutionize that work because they're perfect. But people know how to build systems that have imperfect elements and make them reliable. And that's just another, and that rounds me back nicely to the point that I was making. So it doesn't matter that the language models or the natural language processing or whatever is correct 99.9% of the time, or 89% of the time, or whatever. It's not right 100% of the time. And if you need reliability, you're going to have to build a system that incorporates all of the checks and balances that you would need to get that kind of reliability, just like we have managed to do all the time before we ever had computers. And so there's, I think, a lot of really interesting forgotten knowledge in libraries from the 20th century, when people were like in the industrial age, learning how to optimize human processes and the way that they went about doing things and building those systems that we're going to productively dust off and use. Because if you were looking to hire somebody for your business and you knew that they were going to make a mistake 2% of the time, or I said to you, this guy's or this woman is really good at this work, they're right 98% of the time, you're like, hot damn, yeah, take that, right? Computer program that's only right 98% of the time is not worth a damn. In terms of what you're used to.
Yeah. You say that though, right? Because I would argue that with the advent of cloud computing, and trust me, in current role over the last few years, I've had to explain to them that cloud computing, you can't rely on it being available all the time, right? And in many ways, I am reteaching patterns that you used to do previously when on-premise computing was not reliable, right? They were used to using SharePoint on premises, and the worst thing you could do is put stuff in the disco and all this kind of stuff, and essentially access the bare metal of SharePoint, right? And then essentially overload the system. But at least you've done it, and therefore you can do something about it, right? Whereas now you send something off to Azure or wherever, you may get a response, you may not. You have to handle the fact that it may not, and in many ways, it's significantly unreliable by comparison.
Yeah.
And I've had to teach a team over the last 3 years that, yes, you do have to consider queuing. You have to assume it's going to fail. Which makes me feel like when I was going back to my Linux days and all this kind of stuff, where you just have to assume that things aren't there and go back and all this kind of stuff. So
you think cyclical. About the amount of those non-functional requirements, you know, for the non-nerds, right? Those are the things that we have to take into account for the software that you don't see on the screen, right?
Yeah.
And they drive everything really about how we build software, right? Because if I need to support 2 people, that's pretty important detail compared to 2 million people at the same time, right? That's another reason why, you know, that expertise in the human in the loop is necessary, because you can't just go to a computer program and ask it a question about how do I do anything in our domain that's non-trivial, because there's all these non-functional requirements that have to be taken into account. You as the human know about them. Patrick, if you had good work habits and you weren't such a lazy stick in the mud, settled on your old ways of working, you would get with the program. No, but that process of patiently building a prompt for the AI, that's development. That's your rubber duck program. And I would say that there is no way, if you actually build anything and it's complicated, by the time you're done, you have to figure out all the details. You can't get rid of the details, right?
Yep. It's just whether you do it up front or later on.
Yeah. Or did you discover the Lego in the floor by stepping on it in the middle of the night, or in the broad daylight when it was no trouble and you were wearing shoes?
Yeah.
Where I was going with that is going back to that. It's that now that I have this kind of assistant that can do this knowledge lookup for me and can participate, I still have to carry all the context. I'm still the expert and I still need to use it. How do I do that? What are the tools like for it? And most people can't, and this isn't hyperbole. I literally mean most people cannot use a chat purely text-based interface. They don't have the reading or writing skills to do it. Doesn't make them stupid, but it just means that they don't read and write with high proficiency. Maybe they play an instrument really well or can cook, or if they hear it, or they can tell a story or whatever. But the fact of the matter is humanity is on this spectrum of different modes of thought, and text hits the target for 1 in 5 people.
Yeah.
Maybe. So we're going to have to reinvent all the software, because guess what? Now you can get yourself a pair of sunglasses and you can walk into a room and Meta and Ray-Ban will give you an internet connection, will tell you what is in that room that you just walked into, Mr. Blind, Miss Blind person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so now if you so I have no mind's eye. Like I actually practice trying to picture things in my head, and I can do it. I have to be like right in the right mode of thought. I have a radio station in my head. I can't picture a circle. It's just not my skill. And so when I try to teach computer sciencey stuff, I'd go and do .NET and whatnot. Like the most common feedback I've gotten over the years is you need more pictures. I want more diagrams to show how stuff happens, but that's not how I think. So I can't produce that easily for you. With natural language processing and with computer vision and with audio processing, given the set of facts, it's reasonable for me to be able to project it into the modality that the person who's going to consume it needs on the fly, and actually just have a more pure representation of the information that can be reused by a bigger audience. That's the dream. If you want to walk around and talk to your computer, you can do that. If you want to type, you can do that.
Yeah.
If you want to draw pictures, maybe have it watch the environment. I don't know, but we're moving from that age of ink and flat and moving pictures to a more pure ability to represent information and use it as desired.
Yeah, it reminds me of a book I read a long time. There's a book called Flatland, and Flatland is about a one-dimensional creature who's experiencing it's an interesting concept because it shows you the power of perspective. If you're a one-dimensional creature, which is basically you live on a line, right? And then you're interfacing with a two-dimensional creature, like they're intersecting your one dimension in two different places. So you're like, how can you be in both places at once? Because you're only so simple. And so I think we're like talking a little bit about this type of concept, right? Like we know we're experiencing something right now that's new and it's different and it's changing very quickly. And it's really, I think, hard to perceive like what it's going to be in a year's time, and in some cases 3 months from now, even, right?
Yeah. I know we've invented fire. That's really as far as it goes, and I'm like learning applications of fire. But that's more work for people, not less work for people. I know that there Scrooge McDuck is out there going, oh, I could just get a machine and I'll keep all the money for myself and I'll swim around in it every morning. It's going to be awesome. But those things that it's going to unlock that will be super easy will simply, like all things people do, will become less valuable because they're easy. But the fact that we have this new tool that we can now use to fundamentally apply to every single thing that people do, and we will, means there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing I take away from it and take away in part from this conversation is if you have people who are telling you they have the answers, then probably fire them immediately. And because if they think they have the answers, right, they may not even know what the question is.
Right. And you also have to be, so having made the statement that everybody's systems and software are legacy, right? If you are responsible for some software and you rely on it for your livelihood, I just said that the thing that you have is set it for the scrapyard. Sorry, I got bad news for you. It's going to be replaced somehow, or it's going to be fundamentally changed over the next little while. So you have to contend with bias that brings to the mix as well. I don't believe it because it's not in my interest to believe that I can use it. I'm not going to explore. I'm not going to innovate. I'm going to entrench myself. And you see it all the time. And I said at the top, like I have been doing more POC stuff and less big systems. I'm starting to do big systems because I feel safer doing it. But if you are say you have been building chatbots in Microsoft and you've been using the Teams toolkit and the bot framework and whatnot, that large language models ruined those designs. Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they're like, we have Power Virtual Agents. We got this thing that you can build Power Virtual Agents, and it's completely outmoded now. Not because we did anything wrong or whatever, just some new technology has come and it blew up our design. It doesn't make sense given this. Well, they have to still figure out how to get you to buy stuff so they didn't all get fired the next day and replaced, right? And so those stakeholders and those interests all have their influence to bring to bear too.
It went from I need to know every path that a user could possibly go down to and program for each of those paths to the system, the AI, the model will basically interpret the path and choose its own path and give us a much better experience and a much better answer. And that's what the latest chatbots are doing.
Yeah.
And then, so I totally get that. I want to switch gears a little bit and go into some of the latest developments that we're seeing. And I know one of the things that you've been deep in the weeds on is the agent. We keep hearing agentic behavior, and these sorts of things. And I know you've been deep into that. Can you, like, for the layman out there, right? Can you talk a little bit about what exactly is an agent? Why is an agent different than a chatbot? Why should I care, basically?
Yeah, that's a great question. In terms of AI and chat, even in the context of chatbots, I think you could think of an agent as like an AI program. An agent is just an AI program and what makes it an agent is it knows how to do something. And right now, the narrower that something is, the more likely it is to be able to work well. I was referring to Scrooge McDuck a second ago. There are people who want to build an AI that is a super intelligence that can just do any task, right? And you can just point it out and it does it. And as a human being, you should be rightfully concerned.
Is in a volcano, like in the middle of the ocean somewhere.
Right, because their dream is to keep it all for themselves and not have to have people. That's what they want. And that sort of thing gets a lot of hype, but it's not possible to do. Fortunately for all of us, we can kick that problem down the road a few years at least, I think. But what we can do is we can build something that knows how to order a pizza or turn on the lights downstairs, the things that Siri and Alexa and all those things can do, except now where we've gone from there is that we can say something much more complicated to a large language model than we can to Siri and have it understand what we're doing and look up other information. And the other cool thing that's important about agents is because we think of them as very narrowly defined. So in my product, I call them ants. And I call them ants for a real reason. I want you to think of them as narrow little things that can make mistakes. They're not above you, the person. Yeah. Exactly, and they work together, and you can get the idea of that I don't need it to be like, I want to tell you about this other product that I'm working on, so that's what agents are. And we can test them, we can prove how good they are at something, we can version them. And when we build a system, we can introduce new agents into the mix and improve individual agents without having
breaking
the whole system break. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You're modularizing.
You're modularizing. Yeah. You're doing just what computer software developers have been doing since structured programming really became a thing, which is you're taking the problem, you're breaking it down into modular and cohesive pieces, and then bringing them together to
things that I can even test a bit more discreetly, because I know if I told it to get my mail, I know if it got my mail, I know if it got it in the right time range, I know if it did the things that I wanted to do.
Yeah, exactly. And you can also, I was talking about building systems around people that are followable. AI is an example of that, right? I can build something that's got enough checks and balances in it, even though I know for a fact that none of the pieces are perfect, and still measure and test as an engineer that the overall machine reliably gives me the results.
Presumably you can get different contexts as well, right? So they've released AI assistant type technologies on phones and things like that. Now they have the local context of what's ever on your phone, contacts, photos, and things like that, that an LLM model may or may not have if it was internet facing, right? So presumably one of your ANT modules has the context of wherever it's installed, right? So you could then do something local that's private for a particular business, all the way through to APIs on Microsoft 365, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so go in Army AI, y'all knows. I'm not here for to do a commercial, but that system is a way to explore and to deliver real business systems to people that we can use today, and that we can prove it. The user experience is still the thing that's going to develop over time, right? And those killer apps have yet to be developed, because if I project forward an arbitrary amount of time and I think about the end state, the technology devices will dissolve into the world around me, right? Because everything's going to be visually accessible, right? And processed that way. There are microphones that can hear me talk. I can still use input devices if I want to, but everything's networked together. And how do we actually do our job and go about our lives when we need it to spend 10 minutes and can come back with the answer, or we get it instantaneously, or all those details? That's why the software that we have now and the computers that we have now and the phones and all that stuff are just going to disappear. I got this, I never use this anymore because I have a new VR device that I use, like those Meta glasses, and CES was full of smart devices this year. So why should I be shackled? I should be able to sit in the corner at Starbucks and compute without people even being able to know I'm even doing it. Right?
I mean, that's the vision that you see in so many of those interpretations of Philip K. Dick short stories, right? Minority Report and things like that. If you forget the story, right? Reading your eye, know the context of who you are. Oh, you're Tom Cruise and you're a police guy, so cool. And all this kind of stuff, right? But again, devices are there, right? But they're not, but it's not devices in the way we use it today. It's
the function remains, but the device is gone. It's like that progressive
commercial
where
or it's different
robbed,
or it's
right?
changed, right? And it's that's what Elon Musk is doing with the Tesla cars and the auto driving and things like that, right? Like why the job still exists, but not necessarily the way you know it today.
One of the demos I saw that kind of was a little bit of a light bulb moment for me was, and I say that kind of jokingly because it was literally about a light switch. There's a demo that one of the engineers from Microsoft did, and it's out on GitHub, and anybody can go out and look at it. But he basically hooks he hooks something up to an API that controls a light switch, right? And he explains to the AI that the light switch has two modes. It has an on mode and an off mode. And it has methods that it can interact with to turn the light on and turn the light off. And so then he starts doing things like interfacing with it, right? He says, turn the light on. And in text, it says the light is on, but you could also imagine that it was connected to a physical device that turns the light on. Then he says, turn the light off, turns the light off. He tells it, flash the lights. And this was the thing that got me. Flash the lights. Never taught it. Remember, there's only two methods in this API, right? On and off.
Yeah.
But when he said flash the light, it said light on, lights off, lights on, lights off. I've flashed the lights. And I was like, holy crap. Like, it
interpretation
understands two things, but you told it some novel concept. It somehow knew that flashing was alternating between on and off, and it interpreted that, built it into the API, called the API appropriately to do the physical action, and then flash the lights. And I was like, that is pretty stinking amazing, right?
And that's what made the light go on for you.
Yeah, it really did. I was like, okay, I could see usefulness in that.
Yeah, but we could do that. That's what an agent is. That's the light switch agent. You could do that over and over again. So the mail agent, when I asked it for Dave and April, that was a very sophisticated set of things that needs to be able to do, or to create a new notebook in OneNote, or fetch a page, or run a query. Those are all things that are using an API, and the API is narrowly defined, and I'm able to describe to the language model how to use it in a way that if you were doing it manually, you could also understand those instructions, right? And that's where we are today. So now imagine you start knitting those things together, and they sit between you and all the other technology that you're using. And now how's that going to work? Microsoft came out with this recall PC. I've cat too. And the way it works is obvious. It takes screenshots and records what you're doing and watches your keyboard and does all of these things that are completely objectionable from an InfoSec standpoint. I mean, you can't. What? There's this other thing now on my computer that's watching all of my stuff and sees it, and it's doing things. But
and making interpretation and
yeah. But at the same time, that's what we need from our devices, is the ability to break out of those application silos that we've been building very much on purpose all this time for security. So how does that work? What's that look like? But I'm sure I know how it doesn't work. It doesn't work by installing a virus on my machine that spies on everything I do and sends it to my cloud.
Yeah. We're about to get the cat butt shot on the podcast here.
We've already got it once.
You get the cat ass
maybe
trophy.
Teams will cut it off.
It's my favorite Discworld pod was the cat ass trophy.
Yeah. So the Ant Army, you mentioned mail, notes. I know you're doing a lot of stuff with M365 data, so I'm presuming chats, but I presume like you could apply this concept to any system that has an API, right? So
yeah,
your CRM, your inventory system, your whatever.
Right. Yeah, and that integration, that's part of the kind of software development that I'm doing. A lot of APIs don't even have descriptions, and when they do have descriptions, they were written for computer-to-computer interface and maybe aren't human readable, right? And so there's a whole bunch of techniques that involve curating the API surface and making it easier to understand and providing the right instructions to be able to do it. But again, you can do it, it's possible, and that's why I keep saying the AI revolution is upon us, because we don't have the robot overlords in the sky that can understand everything that's going around us, but we do have really powerful little tiny robots who can speak language.
Yeah.
We can talk to with language.
And for many years, right? Like we've had systems that have structured data in them, right? Like we have a CRM system that understands a customer and a prospect and all these sorts of things that are specific to that business domain. And we've also had a lot of unstructured data. And now I think where I see like some of the opportunity for organizations is to start to build some of that together and interact with both the structured and unstructured days in presumably new and unique ways that we may not have even thought of yet.
Yeah, I think the fact of the matter is the kind of AI systems people have been trying to build the most in the last couple of years, which are chat-based knowledge systems against documents, are in fact some of the hardest and least valuable ones to build. They're predicated on the idea that there's this vast treasure trove of information inside of the company. And even if that is true, which
it still needs to know how to interpret it, right?
And how does it know which information is true, even if it's good quality information? Does it look at the date that was on the document? And because as a consultant, I can't tell you how many times over the years I've had the conversation where I'm meeting with somebody and I ask about, is there a document? Man, it's like your doctor asking you, what have you been eating?
Yeah.
Immediately
we had
suck it in.
It hasn't been updated.
Updated for a while.
And they're apologetic, and I'm like, whatever, that's just normal. You and everybody else who doesn't have documentation, right? So trying to build AI systems on non-existent documentation, that's a really heavy lift. But we have businesses that are full of business systems that are tested with high quality data that actually do the stuff that the business cares about. They're line of operations and do all the stuff. And the first round of AI applications don't really use that stuff because it's hard. The supply of GPUs was scarce. The context window is small. The models aren't that good at structured output. And you get down on the list of why 2 years ago, the idea of building a agent that used business systems was very hard. But doing something that could do chat against a document was feasible and easy. And now it's just as hard as it ever was to do that document story. And all those blockers are still there, but the ability to use AI agents to integrate systems that have high quality data in them and use databases and all that stuff is 1,000 times more feasible than it was, and it's also 1,000th of as expensive.
Interesting.
You could literally blow $3 on one call to GPT-4 when it came out. And I think that the last time I figured it out, if you max out the context window of GPT-4 Omni, which is under 28,000 tokens, it's still cents, not dollars. Right.
Yeah. I think that's what we're seeing too, is some of these new tools that are coming out. We talked a little bit about DeepSeek before in our last episode, and there's a bunch of new or smaller models out there, right, that are maybe have a narrower grounding, but maybe are more useful for a particular task. And I think and not necessarily needing to have a data center right in your backyard to run these things, but getting to the point where some of these things could run on a consumer grade device.
I mean, yeah, I was talking about my 4090 video card. The NVIDIA is going to get some money from me this year. I just don't know what form the purchase is going to take, whether it'll be another GPU or a digits machine. I don't know if you're familiar with the digits devices. I won't decide until at least until they're out and there's a good comparison. But I do computer images using Flux and Stable Diffusion and Comfy UI and Automatic 1111, stuff like that's local. I do a lot of audio processing. You can run Whisper, a bunch of different models from NVIDIA to do real-time transcription, batch transcription, diarization, which is picking out distinct speakers, transcript and time codes, OCR stuff with pretty decent local models. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do locally, and that's just going to get better. There was a famous thing called "We have no moat, and neither does OpenAI," which was a memo by a Google employee a couple years ago, which basically said, "Yeah, everybody's using the same science, and we work in the public, and The reason DeepSeek, as far as I understand it, was able to pull off their impressive work was by optimize. DeepSeek was fundamentally an optimization of a bunch of techniques, and there's no secret sauce.
Yeah.
So I took from it as well.
Yeah, and so that's those optimizations. Two things are going to happen. One is the state of the art at the program level is going to get better optimized, so on and so forth, because there's huge economic incentives to do that. And the computer hardware is just going to keep getting better and better, faster and faster, just like it always is.
Well, I guess in some ways it's very much with the same story we've seen time and time again in the technology industry. I mentioned my first programming experience was with a Borland C++ compiler. I absolutely hated writing code. When I was in college, I had no desire to write code. And then when I got into the business world and experienced my first jobs, I was forced to write code because like I would either spend hours and countless hours manually compiling things into text documents, or I would write code to do that for me. And so I chose the path of least resistance and learned to write some code. But I did it in Visual Basic, and I learned in techniques that I didn't need to understand computer science to be productive in what I was doing. And I think now what we're seeing is in many ways, it's like the advancement of that, right? There's the Wizard of Oz, right? Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, but there still is a man behind the curtain that's building the things and doing the things and training the models. And there is no secret sauce. It's just a new adaptation of kind of the experiences that we've always had in technology, which is that it progresses and it becomes to look more and more like science fiction.
But at the end of the day, you can't wave the details away, and somebody has to understand them. That it's at some point it's not reducible. And we have had productivity aids that bring people into software development and system building since I was a kid, right? When I was a kid, there was a thing called Turtle Logo that I had on my Commodore 64, and I could make it draw circles and lines and whatnot. Now we have Power Platform and OpenAI building applications for people, but it's just a gateway. It can't get you to the destination. You can't learn to play guitar by playing records, right? You can cause music to fill the room, but you can't learn to play guitar by playing records. And that's the thing that a lot of people are having to come to grips with. I'm reading in Reddit and following the travails of the junior developers and people that are coming into the industry. It's a very hard time to be them, and I have a lot of sympathy. And I'm just interested to watch them navigate it. And I routinely see posts about how using AI is retarding their ability to write software and how to learn it. And yeah, it is.
It's because you're trying to cheat it. So
yeah, if you're chopping wood with an axe, you're going to be big and strong. If you're pressing a button to make a machine cut lumber, you're going to have
you better know how to fix the machine.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But there's no getting around it. And so what'll change so you can't get rid of the details, and you have to understand it. Can AI assist in that? Absolutely, it can assist in it. Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff that it can do, but it still needs to be in the mix, specified somehow, because you can't get specific behaviors out of vague instructions, right? Yeah. And in real life, you can't be just like, what's the system going to do today? I don't know. Maybe it'll order a pizza instead of the heart transplant that we expect.
I was having this conversation with a young, very inspiring engineer that I have on my team at the moment as well. He's 24 years old. And I don't envy his position because the way he was taught, even at university, he was taught the front end of things. He wasn't taught the fundamentals underneath. He
taught a form factor, which I said up front, I think is legacy. Yeah. I don't know what the final form factor looks like, but I do know that And if you're the one person who's young and who's listening to us, because if you're one of the 1 in 20,
yeah.
When each time there's been a major sea change in technology, one way that you know that it's happening is there's blood in the streets. People get risk averse about their old stuff. Weird shit starts happening, but there's always blood in the streets. So when Y2K happened, there was a big bust after that, and a lot of that was because of the internet. We've been very overdue. That's why you saw people chasing Web3 and whatnot, because there are people whose business plans are based on that change coming about. They don't really know what it is. They're just looking to catch the wave and ride it. But this is real. And
well, and you've seen even that shift, right? Look at Meta, right? There, you hardly hear anything anymore about the metaverse, right? And I'm sure there's still very smart people working on those problems and probably looking at how to integrate AI into it as well. You hear much more about Meta in terms of their AI models than anything to do with the metaverse and going and hanging out and with your VR goggles and things like that.
I do think that though they're going to make all that money back in their patents that they've got from the computer vision and from the optics and all that fundamental science that they've been doing. The headsets are by definition transitory and
right. Well, again, it's a form factor, right?
It's the form factor, exactly. And so I said the age of ink is over. My son is majoring in art. In fact, I got to get going here in a few minutes because he's an art major at UGA as well as fashion merchandising. Those are both kind of analog things. I can produce art using AI for illustrations and whatnot. That art that I'm producing for my blog and for illustrations and whatnot was never going to be something that I paid an artist to do. It's just new media.
Yeah.
Right. And so these tools are not going to replace quality stuff. They're going to make the quality stuff better, and they're going to open the door to being able to capture information in ways that don't require. Why should you have to be trained to physically be able to produce the media to convey information visually to somebody? I can't do it myself. And if you took something that I designed and I showed it to you, even the end application, maybe I like understood it like the back of my hand, and I've spent like a lot of time working on it. I showed it to you, and you said, "Draw me a picture of it." I'm gonna have to get back to you tomorrow to draw the bad picture of it. I just can't do it very well. But if I had a tool that could go, here's the information, show it to the visual person, and it did it, and it was correct, and they could give me feedback, and it could come back, the world's going to be a better place because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And my son's a computer science major. He's living this world of learning sort of the backbone, and he's also specializing in AI and machine learning. So that's the direction that he wants to go, which I think as a dad is a very smart move. So it will be interesting to see how his education progresses and the thoughts that he has around this as someone who's newly entering the field and seeing some of this for the first time. I think all of us are probably starting to get a little time pressed. I've got a reservation tonight to eat a lot of meat at Fogo de Chao.
Nice.
So any sponsorship opportunities out there, I'm all for. So I plan to be fully on the meat sweats later tonight.
Next time I see you, ask me about the Brazilian steakhouse and the restaurant review. I'm not going to say any names, but I have a great story.
Let's not do it here, but yeah, we'll definitely have to hear that story. Doug, any final thoughts that you can leave us with on just wrapping up or where this is going, or either to ease people's minds or scare the crap out of them?
Yeah, we live in interesting times, and it's hard out there. The world's a scary place, and this is in the mix. I think it's going to be okay, and we're going to work it out. It's something that you need to pay attention to. You could think of like where we are right now with AI as really like when the internet came out and that original round of hype. That was going on 30 years ago. That took it's taken us a long time to get to where we are now. And there was a lot of work that needed to be done to get us there. I think I still believe fundamentally that what we do is going to make the world a better place and make life better for people. Making noticeable improvements in people's lives, nipple. And we're all about making nipples. And so don't be afraid. The world's not going to pass you by, but also don't be complacent. Don't ignore it.
Yeah.
It's real, but it's not a brush fire.
I think those are definitely good thoughts and certainly ones that we've echoed in past episodes and in our conversations. I feel, as someone who's well into my career, that this is something that is you want to be involved in. You want to be on the forefront of it. You want to be someone who's driving it and enabling it in your organization, not someone who is stuck in the past, frankly, right? And I shared some of my hesitation and some of my struggles with it, but that's all, I think, part of the learning process as well, right? We have to figure out how, we all have different working styles. We all interface with things differently. So what does this mean for me to be productive? Because I think differently than you. I think differently than Giles. So I think finding your place with it, but finding a place for it in what you do is, and potentially where you do it, is equally as important.
Good words.
Yeah, fascinating conversation. I think this could have been like the first 12-hour episode of the Enterprise Influencers podcast, but for all of our sakes and our audience's sake, we should probably cut it short there. So yeah, Giles.
Yeah, so again, thanks, Doug. Thanks, Patrick.
Real pleasure.
It's always been fascinating to talk more about AI, as we should probably rename the podcast to an AI podcast, I think, at this point, because it is.
This is
we'll add an AI at the top, maybe, or something like that. There's a brain rotating. It'd be fine. Yeah, so you can catch
Enterprise influencers.
That's right. Enterprise. There we go. Don't copyright that yet. It's coming. So you can catch us up on the usual platforms, Spotify, my personal kind of go-to, but there's Apple and Google Play and various other ones that I spread it around when we first started and all that kind of stuff. We'll be producing this out probably the next couple of days, and then we'll be back again in the next few weeks or so, Patrick.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks for joining. Thanks again, Doug.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks,
see you later. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.